Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of Society and the Individual. As promised, this is your Monday lecture, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. First off, to review, here is a list of your assignments for week 2. Read chapters 5 and 8 in the New World Reader. Make sure you watch and listen to the TED Talks videos in Moodle. Those TED Talk videos will relate to the forum posting for this week. You know, your initial response is due Thursday at midnight, and then 2 peer responses by Sunday at midnight. This week, I'm going to ask you to think about your family, however you define family, and I want you to think about, let's see, 3 factors or characteristics that constitute your family culture. It's going to be called your social context paper. I want you to use a sociology term in your paper. So whether you find it in the lecture, either from last week or this week, or if you find it in the readings, or if you do any research or anything, just make sure you cite it. The paper is supposed to be between 1 and 2 pages, so that means you gotta make sure you're condensing your information, and it is okay to use first person or use I. I do want an introduction and conclusion paragraph. So if you have any questions, let me know. This week, we're going to use some technology in Moodle, and I want you to find 2 words through the readings or even in this lecture that you're not sure about that causes you to go and do some research and define the definition. And then I want you to add those words to the class glossary in week 2. So each student this week will create 2 entries in the glossary and will pick a term or definition that they don't know and put the definition in. So also too, you just want to cite it, even if you get it from the dictionary online, just make sure you put that in there, and those 2 entries are due Sunday by midnight. And finally, there will be a Moodle quiz, and this is also due Sunday by midnight. Each student gets 2 attempts, and I take the highest grade. So let me know if you have any questions about those assignments. This week, I want to talk a little bit more about some basic terms in sociology, and this week we're going to talk a little bit about immigration, or when somebody moves somewhere different, kind of what happens. So just to kind of get us thinking about who we are and maybe where we live, think about your top 5 Facebook friends, and you can define top as whatever, the people that you like their posts the most, people that you see their information more, and then I want you to surmise the following information. Obviously, you know their gender. What about their race, their age, their educational level, their religion, and their socioeconomic status? And then I want you to go ahead and write them down. Look at those 5 friends, and do you notice anything? What you might find is that those people are very similar to you. In most cases, we have, like our primary and our secondary groups, we tend to have a lot of people who look and think and act like us. And so, you know, I'm just curious if you find that in your friends as well. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about something called the concept of the stranger. So as I noted in the previous slide, humans, it is a human, kind of in some ways biological kind of need where people like people who act, think, and look like them. And if you think about this, this is so true. If you go to a party that you've never been to, you might find somebody who's wearing a t-shirt that says Star Wars, and you think to myself, I love Star Wars. I'm going to go talk to that person. So, you know, think about this. But what happens when people don't act, think, and look like us? And that is kind of what was going to take our PowerPoint this week. There's lots of examples in history of people who are mistreating people who don't look and act and think like them. You can think about World War II and what happened to the Jewish people during then. Think about big waves of immigration to America. You know, think about slavery and what happened there. So there's lots of examples in history, but I also want you to think about your neighborhood. Think about where you grew up. Think about where you are now. Do you see anything, when you think about the concept of the stranger, who is around you? I would highly recommend each of you reviewing the racial dot map in week 2 of Moodle. I found it very interesting for me, and I hope that you will explore it too. So a couple terms that are going to help us this week is race and ethnicity. And I wanted to bring this up because in sociology, we do see them as two separate things. A lot of people use these words interchangeably. So I want to make sure that moving forward, you understand in sociology where we're coming from, and when I use it, that you understand. So race, we define that as when a large number of people share physical characteristics and are seen as a single group on that basis. So for me, I define my race as Caucasian. Ethnicity, it's really about the culture. When a lot of people share certain traits and have some close social interactions, and based on a single group on that basis. So for me, my ethnicity is Hungarian and Polish. So think about that in terms of who you are, and try to get those two terms separate in your mind. Two very, very important concepts: dominant group and minority group. The dominant group, or the majority group, is a social group that possesses political, economic, and social power. And generally, consciously or unconsciously, the dominant group does treat a minority group in a different way that tends to be discriminatory. The minority group is a group that tends to have a cultural and physical distinction from the majority group, and thus experiences unequal treatment. I do want to reiterate that minority does not mean that there's less people. A minority means that they lack the power that the majority or the dominant group has. So again, think about that. And as I talked about it in week 1, you can even think about this in terms of history. You can even think about it about the high school cafeteria. Who's the dominant group and who's the minority group? Okay, so let's think about immigration for just a little bit, because it's going to kind of play into these concepts that I want to talk about. But of course, you can relate this to almost anything about when you have to start a new job, when you move to a new neighborhood. So assimilation. Assimilation is the process when somebody from a racial or ethnic minority group has to function within the mainstream society without indicating any marked cultural, social, or personal differences from the majority group. So immigrants that come over and assimilate, that they start to look American and they act American, okay? Marginality, on the converse, is when people are a product of their home culture and are attempting to live within another, but they're not fully assimilated and aren't seen as part of that one major culture. So again, I'm sure we all have examples of this where we live, or we can conjure up some examples, or even think of some TV series that might relate to this. I do want to say that this is a very, very difficult process. And if you've never had to put yourself in this situation, it can cause some stress and strain. I've had to live overseas as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, and I studied in England and Spain. And even in there, having to be the minority was really difficult for even me to try to assimilate to culture. So also too, just something to think about. I thought that these were interesting and I wanted to share them with you. Chain migration. Okay, so when you have to move somewhere different, I bet you always want to know if there's any friends or relatives nearby. And so this happens in immigration, that you might see a flow of immigrants moving to one settled area because it makes it a little bit more safe. It makes them feel more comfortable. And when you get a flow of immigrants in the same area, then what happens? You might notice little shops, little Mexican bakeries popping up. You might notice a Russian Orthodox church, or you may notice some German social clubs. And so this happens so that people can also practice their culture and again be able to eventually mainstream. So again, some people in America get really upset that when immigrants come over, then they're not being assimilated into the mainstream culture. But in sociology, we see it as a process. And, it's one of the things that nobody ever wants to shed their entire culture. And so, when immigrants come over and kind of duplicate their home culture here, again, it's part of knowing who you are and having an identity. Okay, some other things you can think about too is convergent and persistent cultures. So immigrants or subgroup actually become integrated into the dominant culture that's a convergent culture, and that's very difficult to do sometimes. And then there's a persistent culture, and it's somebody who's adhering to their own way of life or their home country and is resisting or just hasn't been able to absorb themselves into the dominant culture. So again, I know that you all have your thoughts about immigrants and immigration, but I just wanted to give you some sociology terms to kind of frame that and to think about it from a way sociologists might think about it. So these are just a little things I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoy the TED Talks videos. I look forward to reading about your social context in your family culture. If you want to use any of these terms or concepts in your paper, you're going to want to cite it by MLA as a lecture. And it's the same thing for TED Talks. That's how you would cite a TED Talks for any of your forum posts or for your papers. It's as a lecture. So, okay, that's going to be it for me. I'll see you all next Monday for our next lecture. In the meantime, just call or email if you need anything else. Okay, good luck.